Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. In this episode, we are looking at an event which has major geopolitical implications. After several rounds of quiet negotiations, the Chinese have been able to pull off what many regard as a diplomatic coup because they have finally got the two arch rivals of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Iran, to start engaging again with diplomatic initiatives and, at least for the time being, to put aside their years of rivalry, which has led to many fallouts in the region. We will discuss that with our two experts. We have Dr. Zorawar Donaldson with us, who is the author of several works and is a geostrategist of consequence. His recent book on power shift spells out very clearly how China is edging forward as a global power. And we have Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad, who to many Latitude viewers doesn't need an introduction. He's been on our show many times. He has been India's ambassador to Middle Eastern countries, namely Saudi Arabia twice, Oman and the UAE, and is the author of many works, most recently a very powerful work, which I believe was recognized as the book of the year last year, on West Asia at war and the implications of the conflicts there. So I'll start with you, Ambassador Ahmad, sir. What do you make out of this arrangement? Because obviously it's attracted global attention. I'm sure all of us, when we read the news first, our eyebrows went up to say, wow, this is an unusual breakthrough. But the US media played it down, obviously, and didn't really give China too many brownie points for this achievement. Whereas the Chinese have been calling it a diplomatic victory of great consequence. And what is equally important is that could this be Saudi Arabia's new initiative to start having peaceful engagements with its traditional rivals and look at re-emerging as a key player in the geopolitics of West Asia, because until now the Americans were really calling the shots. And some say it could produce a potential framework for eventually normalizing Saudi Arabia's relations with Israel. Your view, sir?
The most important aspect is that Saudi Arabia and Iran are now restoring diplomatic relations. They had stopped communicating with each other 7 years ago in very difficult circumstances. The execution of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, Shia cleric in Saudi Arabia, and the attack on the Saudi embassy in Tehran. And since then, over the last 7 years, we have seen an escalation of conflict in Syria and Yemen, which have been described as proxy conflicts on the one hand, an extraordinary vituperative exchange of rhetoric on both sides, largely of a sectarian character. And above all, they on occasion came close to war, particularly in 2019. So yes, I think this is a very important development. China obviously has been a very major presence in the region, but it has avoided involvement in political matters. It has even been called a free loader or a free rider by the Americans at a time when the Americans themselves never allowed anyone else to play a role in the region. Much of that has changed. Scholars had already noted about 2 or 3 years ago that there is now a fresh approach likely from China, and they had called it a quasi-mediation policy. That refers to China attempting to harmonize relations between a estranged power as a result of diplomatic effort, and then facilitating further engagement and dialogue between them. So yes, I would say that Saudi Arabia and Iran are now talking seriously to each other. It is a very major breakthrough. and it is a diplomatic triumph as far as China is concerned.
Okay,
I'm
so
not
that's
sure about anything pertaining to Israel. I think that is something we can discuss later, but I don't think Israel has anything to do with it.
no. I was just asserting a view that's doing the rounds that the Saudis could be looking at this as a potential framework to start then engaging with Israel also.
I don't think Israel is in the picture. Israel has to set its own house in order. It is a deeply polarized country as of now. It had hoped that that so long as Iran was portrayed as a threat to regional security, that might facilitate an engagement with the Saudis. But now that this is not happening, I think the possibility of normalization, never a serious prospect, is now very remote.
Okay, so well, you've got some very strong views on this, and it's come out very clearly that Israel's nowhere now in the equation. But Dr. Zorawar, going back to China. Now, China has certainly achieved a diplomatic coup, and some would say that while the US has been busy squandering time and resources in getting engaged with all sorts of conflicts in the region, ranging from Iran, Libya, Afghanistan, and even Syria, the Chinese were waiting and watching for their coming out party occasion, as it were, in the Middle East. And they've started enhancing their trade, their infrastructural engagements, and now logically leading to becoming a diplomatic heavyweight of sorts in the Middle East equation. Now, would you say that China is likely to become more and more as a go-to partner by conflict-ridden Middle East, assuming that they see America in a state of strategic overstretch because of their involvement in Ukraine and because of America's inability to put resources all over the world the way it was doing 10 or 20 years ago?
Mm-hmm. So absolutely. In fact, for the last decade, if we just look at purely the geo-economic balance of power, Asia's trade with the Middle East, West Asia, is guarding Iran's economy when it was facing sanctions. So you've got China has had this leverage for a long time. I think the more interesting question is why now? It could have done this even a decade ago. And if we go back to history, we, of course, faced China when it was in the American camp, and a lot of stuff that was happening in the Middle East was seen through an anti-Russian common alliance that the Americans and the Chinese had forged, and we were on the other side. Now you're seeing sort of a different shift by the Chinese. They're beginning to realize that the possibility of let's say a potential Cold War with the United States will likely spill over into a strategic region where their energy and commodity resources come from. So purely from a grand strategic self-interest, they are safeguarding one important supply line. Of course, the other is the Russians. They have continental routes as well. They also, of course, are doing it for domestic reasons. You have Xi Jinping now, who is now completely the ultimate supremo of the Chinese Communist Party. He is now firmly in place for the foreseeable future. They wanted to sort of showcase a diplomatic win. I think they're also, of course, contrasting the American role in the world today, which, regardless of whichever way you gloss over it, is absolutely in shambles in terms of the aspirations and this idea of a manifest destiny, this indispensable power, and it's anything but that. So the Chinese have certainly scored a diplomatic win. Whether it will lead to a deeper military strategic involvement in the region, I'm not so sure yet. The United States and Russia are still the preeminent military superpowers, not only in the world, but even in the Middle East, West Asia. You have the Iran, you have Syria, they rely a lot on the strategic link with Moscow. Israel, Saudi Arabia continue to rely on Washington to safeguard their domestic security, regime security. In fact, you have Saudi Arabians who are openly saying that we are going to leverage this relationship with China to bargain hard with the Americans. So what you're really seeing at a macro level is a multipolar world coming into place. It's not going to be neat. It's going to be messy. They're not going to be clear dividing lines between democracy, autocracy, Eastern Bloc, Western Bloc. Everyone wants a piece in everything. And I think it's going to be a complex picture. Who gains the most? I would say regional powers, the weaker states, when you have a plethora of great powers competing for their attention, for their interest, for their influence, for access to their economies, access to their capital, I think they get out upfront. So I would say the real winners are Iran, Saudi Arabia, and West Asia. We as neighbors of that region indirectly benefit. We are the free riders, so to speak. We are doing what China did for 25, 30 years. We are riding. We benefit in that sense. But of course, it also means that our entry point into these capitals in terms of engagement, the price has gone up. So we're going to have to offer more on the table as well.
Yeah. So good. So I think we've understood the West Asian viewpoint, and we've understood what China is attempting to achieve. We'll come back after a break to look at what all is at stake for India. And we'll also look at, could China then get into more such diplomatic initiatives in West Asia? But that after a break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two distinguished guests with us, and I'll go to Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. Ambassador sir, kindly help us understand that what led to the Saudi Arabians and the Iranians reaching out to China to solve their problems when, as we all know, the Saudis have traditionally banked on the US for a variety of reasons. One point is that probably President Xi Jinping made a visit to the region last year in December, and then he got things going because he wanted a big diplomatic win. This has clearly taken Washington by surprise, though they are not admitting it as much. But they also there's also a plan to re-implement a security pact signed 22 years ago, under which both parties had agreed to cooperate on issues like terrorism, drug smuggling, money laundering, etc. But how is the world suddenly going to let Iran off the hook, considering these are the allegations that they've traditionally placed on Iran, notwithstanding the fact that the Saudis themselves have been sponsoring for years a whole lot of proxy wars and conflicts in the region also?
There are, you have put forward a number of different questions, and I will try to address them. The reason that the two countries approached China is because it is a credible presence in the region. That is the most important aspect. It is non-intrusive, and it is non-hegemonic, and it is non-prescriptive. Simultaneously, it has very high stakes in regional stability. It is not only a major energy buyer, it is also a major investment. It is a major investor in the region. It has very substantial trade ties. And of course, the most important aspect for the success of the Belt and Road Initiative, you need a very stable West Asia as well. All the major West Asian countries have signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative, not only as they are not only the landscape and the geography for the they are also investors and consultants and contractors as well. So yes, and at the same time, China has the standing. It has the clout as a permanent member, etc. I also pointed out to you that the quasi-mediation policy does not mean that China has given priority to its own hard security interests in the region. Its sponsorship of peace plan is overwhelmingly benign, and it is overwhelmingly diplomatic and political. China has not pretended that it can solve these problems, but it can facilitate engagement, dialogue, and a resolution of some of the issues over time. The other points you have mentioned are the allegations made by the United States. For overwhelming domestic compulsion, the United States treats Iran as a hate object. It is very much influenced in this regard by the Israel lobby. And therefore, much of what they have been saying about Iran, it is part of the package of calumny that the West has put together over the last 3 or 4 decades. It has very little basis in reality. It has harmed Iran, certainly, but I would say to you that Iran is a significant presence in regional and world affairs, and I think it has indicated that despite what the West might be doing, it is capable of looking after its own interests.
Well put, sir. Well put. And in fact, it leads me to my question to Dr. Zorawar. Now, I'm quoting from the writings of a senior fellow at Chatham House who had said that we should be cautious about overstating Beijing's intentions because this is more about China's interest in the regions, but it has brought China and allowed China to bring together two key actors who are regional and economic players, and therefore for the purposes of reducing regional tensions. So implying that China is a peacemaker. But at the same time, China has its own long-term agenda in the region because China's success in the Persian Gulf points to the breakdown of American control over the Gulf states, as it were, and its leadership in the region because of these arrangements would allow China to have greater telecommunications, artificial intelligence, and a whole lot of new set of arrangements for the region, apart from the fact that, of course, the reasons you mentioned earlier, such as oil and China's own interest of energy and trade and BRI there. Your views?
So there's no doubt that the consequence of what's happening is going to dilute American alliances over time. These states are not able to get their basic requirements of economic development, even security, from this single sole superpower, former superpower. They are going to look for more options. But doesn't mean they're going to defect from those alliances. It's just that these arrangements might get looser over time. I think if you look at even the American discourse today, their own future commitments across the planet today are in doubt. We just do not know where they will really step up. I mean, there are certain few flashpoints and hotspots where we know it's ironclad, Japan, Israel. We're not sure about Taiwan, but certainly parts of the South China Sea. Is West Asia going to fall into that under all circumstances? We're not so sure. So you are already acknowledging, the West is already acknowledging a new multipolar world that's coming into being. But to sort of leap from here to say that China is going to be the next sort of regional superpower is taking it too far yet, because I think the real leverage comes if you are a security provider, if you are going to be there to safeguard these regimes in their security. I think whatever we know from Chinese statecraft, strategic culture, and even its engagements, it has North Korea and Pakistan, two sort of frontline allies that it has. We are yet to see them give that kind of firm security commitments to states even that are deeply close to it. So I think even from the region, they're not going to rely or depend on China for everything. They want China as one of the options. It's a big economy, big source of investment, big market. But there are others too. I think this is where
it's in West Asia for 5,000 years. This relationship has been constantly nourished, and today it is very, very substantial in all areas: trade, in energy, trade, finance, and the presence of our community. But India has never attempted to leverage this into a broader security or strategic role in the region. It has eschewed this. Its approach has been transactional and bilateral, and it has continued that approach regardless of the scenario changing in the region. Some of my colleagues and I have for the last decade been saying that the time has come for India to play a substantial role to promote stability in the region, and India is a credible player.
Okay.
At the same time, I don't believe that this is a zero-sum scenario. India brings a lot of value to the region, and every country in the region cherishes India's presence. But I would also recommend strongly that India should focus on a long-term basis on developing a certain perspective with regard to where it wants to go in the region. This kind of transactional approach is not helping. It is past its use by date.
Yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head with that. And I hope your former colleagues and friends in South Block are listening. But until our next episode, we want to thank both of you for your wisdom. And clearly, there is an opportunity here for India if we decide to exploit that. Let us see how India responds to the situation. Thank you for your wisdom, and thanks to everybody for watching. Until our next episode, goodbye.